I think Sarasota is a very special place to many people. For me, it's where I raised my family. My children went to school here, and I love the people that I interact with on a daily basis from a professional level, and also the community that we serve.
I think Sarasota is so great today because of the beautiful beaches, the restaurants, the cultural aspects such as the Ringling Art School, the Ringling Museum, Cottazon, the Players Theater, the ballet. There's just a phenomenal number of things that most towns this size don't have. There really isn't anything that you could want to do that you can't do in Sarasota. And what you don't have to do is shovel snow.
The building that we're in today is now called the Historic Courthouse, so that it is distinguished between the Judicial Center, where a lot of the court activities occur. But in the day, back when this building was built, it was the county courthouse building where all of the activities occurred. It is a beautiful building, majestic for its day, and inside there are so beautiful elements of historic value that you don't see in modern buildings today.
The elements of this building added up together just present a beautiful bijou of a building. You have this fantastic ironwork that you see throughout the courthouse. And then the terracotta work, the woodwork is just truly spectacular.
You walk into this building and you'll see marble walls, you'll see rotundas, you'll see beautiful images in the floor. The ceilings are beautiful wood, pecky cypress. So you see a lot of historic elements that really bring back a day that doesn't exist today when you're thinking about the construction of public buildings in particular.
I think the courthouse was emblematic of Sarasota. You know, it was built shortly after Sarasota County became a county.
What people probably don't realize is a lot of these counties used to be the same county. You know, Manatee County used to be Manatee and DeSoto and Sarasota and parts of Charlotte and parts of Hardee. And I mean, so these counties were huge.
So the civic leaders of Sarasota got together and decided to approach the legislature so Sarasota could break away and form its own county in 1921. And then in March of 1925, they hired Dwight James Baum, who is a nationally known architect from Syracuse, New York, to come to Sarasota. Initially, he came to design Cottazon for John Ringling. He was the signature architect for Sarasota. Many buildings of his still stand today, and I think the courthouse is one of the most beautiful of them all.
Most architectural movements are really the response to some aspiration or some external pressure. Right now, climate change, that's an external pressure that's really creating a new type of architecture. In the 1920s, it was more aspirational. We had the Roaring 20s, the Florida land boom, and this idea of Florida as a resort community. And that led to this style, the Mediterranean revival style, that came to Florida during that time. It was very unique. And that architecture of that period, especially in Sarasota, really had an impact, you could say even internationally, on architecture today. I think the impact of the Sarasota County Courthouse at the time was really an introduction of Sarasota to the world. I don't think it was coincidence that they chose a very prominent architect in New York City to design the county courthouse back in the 1920s.
What I want people to understand about the history of this building is the pride the community took when it first opened up. Also the pride of the craftsmanship and artistic endeavor that was put into this building. The Masonic Lodge laid the granite cornerstone in 1926, and the school shut down so the community could gather together. They sang, they said prayers, they listened to speeches from different people. So there was a real sense of community. You know, everybody seemed to be working for the same thing, and that was for the successful growth of the community.
Florida, being a relatively young state, doesn't have those, 17th century markers, and we don't have all those things that you might see in Massachusetts. And so we've lost so much, and we have already demolished so many things over the years that to have something still standing, I think is tremendous.
It's a beautiful building, but I tell you, from years ago, there's been a journey to get back into this building. A lot of restoration has gone on, and a lot of growth has gone on in this community.
The building is now in the National Register of Historic Places. And what it really takes to get a building there is the community has to take care of it. And this community really has, over the past decade, revived this building.
So the color of the building took an interesting path because at one point in its history, it became drab beige. But it certainly wasn't a part of any historic palette that had been on the building. And so there was a little bit of controversy when there was an attempt to change the color to the historic color.
One of the things that happened over the decades is multiple layers of paint and coating were applied to the building. Those had to be removed for the health of the building because they weren't letting the building breathe properly and the bricks were getting saturated. So we had to take those off, but at the same time, it really revealed a lot of those very intricate details that really define the Mediterranean Revival style.
After there was a lot of discussion, there was definitely a move to support that it would be changed to the historic color, and that's the color that we see on the building today. So peeling back all of that was really a rewarding experience to see. And then, of course, the county was generous in its funding to allow for the historic elements to be restored, which really brings the building back to its original splendor.
I've been a lawyer now for going into my 31st year, so there's been a complete change in the judiciary over those 30 years.
Well, over the years, fortunately, our bench here in the 12th Circuit, and all over the state for that matter, became a lot more diverse. That, I think, made a big difference, and it was a positive one.
I think we have a more diverse bench. I think we have a younger bench. I think we have a very well-educated, well-informed, and much more diverse judiciary. On the downside, I would say, back in the old days, you would walk through the corridors and you'd have the courtrooms and the judges' offices would be right behind them, and their assistants would be there, and you could simply walk in and say hello, maybe schedule a hearing.
Probably till we started in the Silvertooth Center, we had no security. There was no security of any kind.
It was so much more casual in those days. There was such a spirit of camaraderie. If you wanted to see a judge, you just knocked on his door and went into his office. Now you have to practically be a member of the CIA to get up to see a judge.
And those days are long gone. I don't know if I say I miss them or not, but that was probably the biggest difference between that time and when we finally went to secure. Originally, that east wing was the court wing, the judicial wing. It had not only the court system, but also the sheriff's office. And the sheriff not only had his office there, but he had his residence in that southeast corner of the courthouse.
It was an interesting requirement in Florida that the sheriff actually live in the jail.
There's a rich history tied to my agency in this courthouse for sure. The sheriff's wife usually fixed the meals for the inmates at that time, and the sheriff actually had an office and his living quarters here in the facility. But you have to remember, when we first moved in here in the 20s, the sheriff only had 3 deputies. We currently have over 1,000 employees in our agency, so for the sheriff and a few deputies, this was certainly adequate, but you can see how much we've grown over the years. I just think it's really cool that a part of our history was preserved and that we renovated this courthouse. That's a piece of our history, and it's pretty neat.
So one of the ways I see the office having changed dramatically is we've gone from an in-person environment to providing services via the internet. any kind of service that we can provide electronically. We have been focused on convenience so that the public does not have to come down to the main town and find parking and walk and be inconvenienced by waiting in line.
We do our job, fortunately now, with a lot of other help, technological help. I don't think we do the job itself any differently than we did when we first started. I think we still try very hard to not make our minds up until we've heard all the facts, because sometimes they change. And I think we try to be polite and considerate like we always have. So those qualities about how we do our job have not changed.
The clerk's offices in Florida are a really interesting entity because they are all independent constitutional officers, our clerk of court. There are 67 counties in Florida, there are 67 clerks. They are elected and they are completely independent officers. And the interesting thing is, of course, judges, we're in the judicial branch, we're an independent branch of government. We're also independently elected constitutional officers. And so it's very easy to go to your corner and say, this is mine, this is yours, but instead we've always worked together. So it's an interesting relationship because although we are all independent, we really are dependent on each other and do so very well, I think.
The first thing you learn that they don't teach you in law school is you be nice to the clerks in the clerk's office.
My first recollection of the courthouse after I had entered the legal profession, I ran errands over to the courthouse. Every day, late in the afternoon, I would go over and file documents in the clerk's office, in the probate. And one of the things I remember was how kind the clerks were to a new boy like me.
What inspires me to come to work every day is that I deal with the problems that may not have an easy answer. And our job is to help you. In some way, somehow, we are going to let you leave here knowing that you were provided with the best service you could get.
Do you think the courthouse will be here in 100 years?
I'm surprised it's still here, to tell you the truth.
Sarasota, 100 years, you know, from orange groves to high rises in some respects. We've come from basically a little cow town to, I think it's really a crown jewel in Southwest Florida.
Well, for the next 100 years, I hope it slows down somewhat. I know it won't. I know what's coming, and then it'll be more of the same. Every time I drive through a neighborhood where there's a 1,500 square foot house, I know that one day there's going to be a 5,000 square foot house. Or if you see an empty lot, you can bet the farm that there's going to be a condominium or a hotel on it. That's just the way it's been.
Sarasota has changed so dramatically over the years. Indeed, all of Florida has. I think it's important to kind of step back periodically and look back over our shoulder and see what remnant there might be that can serve as a reminder to us about what Sarasota was back in the day.
I hope that Sarasota still has that a small town charm to it, despite having all the amenities that you would want. I hope that you still have beautiful beaches. I hope that you still have beautiful parks and places to bring your children. I hope that we still have a very robust rural community where people still are growing food and doing all those things that my family's been doing for generations. I hope that you still have the best of everything so that there is something for everybody.
I think our clerk, Karen Rushing, really did a wonderful thing for our county, a gift to our county when that courthouse was restored, because that took a lot of resources and a lot of her energy, and it's truly a gift to our community.
I know from my own interaction, particularly with people who grew up in this community, the historic buildings are so important to them. And so I think there is an appreciation for preservation, and certainly our leaders, our county commission, have always expressed their interest and their funding of preservation of this building.
I can remember the first time I came into this building through those heavy wooden doors and the smell. It smelled old. just absolutely awesome that we were able to restore it to the extent that we did so we can preserve this piece of history, because it's not only a piece of history of this community, but it's a piece of history related to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office as well. So jump at the opportunity to come over here and walk around and look at the old bones of this building.
You know, if you go to Europe and walk into a cathedral that's 800 years old, we don't have that here. But we can someday if we are mindful about the buildings that we have here and protecting them. So I hope that 100 years from now, they will talk about how we properly addressed the challenges of today through the architecture that we're practicing now. We have a completely different set of challenges now than they did 100 years ago, but they're vital, not only for our community's future, but the future of the world as a whole. So I hope that as architects and designers, we are making decisions that will help us get to the second centennial. 100
years is really hard to imagine, but it's certainly something to celebrate, it's something to appreciate, and it's certainly something to value as the community continues to grow and faces the next 100 years.